would like to call this meeting to order. Oops, actually, according to my clock, it's not quite 7 o'clock. Oh, now it is. Call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Scio Township Board of Trustees. Now 7 o'clock. We are holding this meeting in person unless and until the Michigan Legislature acts to allow remote participation again. All elected local government bodies are required to meet and vote in person. The board has decided to extend this option of remote participation to members of the public for purposes of viewing and to make comments at the designated times. Before we call the roll, please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
When the clerk calls the roll, those members of the Board of Trustees who are present at Township Hall should indicate that they are present. Clerk, please call the roll.
Apologies for the laryngitis.
Oh, you want me to call it?
I got it. Flintoff, here. Courteau, here. Jerome,
Here.
Knoll, here. McLaughlin, here. Hathaway,
Here.
Palmer, here. All present.
The adoption of the agenda. It's a very simple agenda for this special meeting.
Before we go on, can I make a simple note? At the top of the agenda, it says regular meeting.
Yeah, that's Will's.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to
Okay, all right.
explain that, but when we adopt the agenda, we should, that is a very good point, thank you, Treasurer Palmer, that we should amend the agenda to indicate that it is a special meeting. That was inadvertent. There's a choice of templates in creating agendas, and we simply started with the wrong template and didn't notice it until after it had been posted. But this is a special meeting, as we announced, so please make that correction. And are there any other?
There are no communications for
Oh.
special meetings.
So yes, so let's eliminate that item D, communications to the Board of Trustees. Are there any other corrections? Is someone prepared to move the agenda?
So, okay, I'll second Jackie.
All right, moved by Courteau, seconded by Palmer. All those in favor of approving the agenda as corrected, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The agenda is approved. That brings us to public comment. This is a time for members of the public to speak for up to 3 minutes on any matters under the purview of the Board of Trustees. Are there any people who are present in person who would like to address the board at this time? Please come to the table, take turns, and Trustee Jerome, if you're able to keep time for the public comments.
Linda Smith, 4144 West Liberty Road, Scio Township. I'm the Scio Local Roads Advisory Committee Chair as well as a member of the DDA. I've reviewed the revised budget as of today, 4 p.m., and I see improvements. A lot of work's been done. The resolutions requested by the Roads Advisory Committee for road improvements under the Washtenaw County Road Commission 2022 Road Agreement Number 1 are reflected in this budget. We're happy to see them there. Page 17, General Fund 101, Activity 445, has $115,000 allocated for drain culvert improvement or replacement, which we had requested and is noted by the Washtenaw County Road Commission as needed. Page 33, Fund 400, Township-wide SAD, line 803.00, has $422,100 for road improvements. Also under the Washtenaw County Road Commission agreement. That will allow the Washtenaw County Road 2022 Road Agreement Number 1 to be executed by Scio Township and the 2022 Scio Road projects therein to go forward. The DDA resolution for the Washtenaw County Road Commission 2022 Road Agreement Number 2, which is commercial roads, more as opposed to residential roads. specified that one project, Dino Drive, would have matching funds from the DDA. Page 49, the DDA budget, line 823.300, roads, shows $117,600, which was the correct amount allocated under the DDA budget that was just adopted, with Scio matching funds shown on page 35, Fund 402, $117,600. It is hoped that the DDA can facilitate the Dino Drive business owners to contribute a third of the total estimated cost by the Washtenaw County Road Commission of $235,200 for this road improvement this year, which will leave a budget balance if our ongoing effort is successful. If not, the existing budgeted amounts will allow Scio Township to sign the Washtenaw County Road Commission Agreement Number 2, and Dino Drive's project will go forward in 2022. Thank you. There are several change in format revisions in the budget that might be confusing with the current and new 2022 SAD project budget pages. The amounts do tie out to the SAD numbers that the Scio Township assessor provided to the Road Advisory Committee last month. There are several SAD projects in process. There are several that are expiring this year, and there are 4 new SAD projects starting in 2022. Ultimately, I think that the existing SAD budget pages reflect correct numbers for the 2022-23 year allocations, and the new 2022 SAD projects shown on page 43 are correctly allocated. These accounts are pages 34 through 43 of the entire budget package. As for the Resolution 22XX, I've reviewed this document and I see that this language is useful in that it establishes an accounting oversight for the annual budget to monitor spending and enforces Mr. Rowley's request from the last meeting that the budget be reviewed and variances analyzed during the year, not just at the end of the year. I was happy to see the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Is there someone else who would like to speak?
Good evening, Caroline Altamar, Scio Township resident. I wish to speak tonight regarding the mess that is Scio finances. David Rowley's presentation on the 3/22 Board of Trustees meeting was very clear. He has the experience to know what he's talking about. He knows talking about one-time investment. He's talking about one-time investment to repair or actually create a foundation on which to create a plan for Scio going forward and bring us into compliance, the lack of which could be very bad for our bond rating. To quote a fellow resident who says it very clearly, we can no longer make financial decisions as we have in the past. We are on the verge of losing financial credibility. And with one financial person out on sick leave for an undetermined amount of time and the Scio audit waving yellow flag warnings, Scio has problems. And Supervisor Hathaway's Band-Aid of using current staff is not recommended by the state or by professionals, unquote. Thank you, Administrator Rowley, for bringing your depth of knowledge and experience. And it's so unfortunate some of the board members and Mr. Hathaway choose to ignore what you bring to the issues. On a different topic, and I'm well aware that my comment will change nothing, but I feel a need to say it. This is a definition of gaslighting. Quote, to manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity, unquote. And this is the definition of a non-apology, quote, a statement in the form of an apology that does not express remorse or assigns fault to those ostensibly receiving the apology. Mr. Hathaway, your response to Trustee Knoll and resident Kathleen Brandt regarding the printout of the budget on 3/22 Board of Trustees meeting was a textbook example of gaslighting and a non-apology. These are your words to Trustee Knoll and the residents. Quote, I'm sorry that some folks are encountering more difficulty than others, unquote. This is a classic non-apology. You would have been better to have said, I'm very sorry to everyone for the errors in the formatting of the budget printout. In the future, I will make sure that all such documents are legible, printable, and make sense. Period, stop. You said, quote, to Kathy Knoll, I said to you, what I intended to say is that I referred to you to the deputy treasurer as you were confused, in your words. This is gaslighting, saying that she is responsible for the situation. It's better to have not said that at all. She and others had trouble. Period. Stop. Another of yours. It is possible to line up the pages of the budget printout. Again, gaslighting. Again, what was the need to say that? To what end? To make you feel better? To make them feel bad or ignorant? That was the result, and it's completely unacceptable. Another quote, it's not warranted to call it sloppy. Again, gaslighting. I'm sorry if you felt that my comment was pejorative. Very typical non-apology, essentially lip service.
Time's
Not-
up.
Non-apologies are actually a form of gaslighting, and your continual use of both is totally unacceptable, disrespectful, and demonstrates poor leadership. Thank you.
Anyone else who is present who would like to speak during public comments?
This news article, Township hears dire warnings over finances. It's telling, isn't it? And you really, it can't be hidden anymore when your attorney says, the more dysfunctional you are, the more you will pay me. Residents have been pointing out issues with the governance of this township for some time now. It's not just you, oh no, but you are putting the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the dysfunctional cake that everyone can now see a mile away. Residents have been called a small group of residents, as in you are nothing of consequence. You've called us bullies because we get loud when you make decisions that are not in the best interest of this township. You've reduced our time to speak, but we still show up and we let you know what we think. What smart, articulate residents want is to see this board follow the advice of the administrator Rowley to a T. Your original Gang of Five voted for the administrator model. Now that the administrator is advocating for something that you don't like, you are shutting him down. He's not a puppy that you can't train the way you want, so you return him to the pet store. The township's health and well-being is in your hands. Give it over to the professional who knows how to drive this car. His words were exactly what this township needed to hear. You have, with your decisions last week, made Scio the laughingstock of Southeast Michigan small government. Are you proud? Are you learning that you might have made a mistake? Or are you stubborn and plan to dig your heels in? Scio residents want to know. Thank you.
Are there others who would like to speak?
Yeah, I want to go up to Steve Feinberg, Scio Township. Hathaway, could you please look at me and listen to what I'm saying?
So that,
Excuse me?
I'm trying to set the timer for your 3 minutes.
Oh, let me know when it says so then we can start. Let me know when my time starts, okay,
Sure,
sir?
sure. There we go.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to thank you personally and your cohorts here for allowing me to activate a majority of the citizens in Scio Township. Your activities have been a huge catalyst in allowing people to become more involved in local government. I personally never thought I would be this involved or interested in it at all. But your actions have stimulated me in such a way, as well as my neighbors and everybody that I talk to, that it's going to be a very interesting year. Are you writing down what I'm saying, or would you like to see my eyes? Eye contact is very important, especially an individual who lacks leadership. So I think it's important. I'd like to thank that. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Rowley, for your input. I think it's well respected, and it's what this board needs. When I was chair of a department at the university, I brought in people who had expertise that I lacked and complemented my skill level. And I listened to what they said. That's why I brought them in. That's the most important thing. We all don't know what everything else that's going on here. Still writing, buddy, huh? Must be saying a lot of important things. You know, it's disrespectful to write there and not listen. Very much so. I'm a professional, I'm a surgeon. I've gone through a lot of education, and it's disgusting to see people who act in an unprofessional way that are in a position of authority like that. So I'd just like to tell you, you know, man up. I almost wonder who wears your pants at home. Maybe that's why. I've seen people like that, who are weak individuals at home, come here to something like this and try to project power because they're deficient in their home life. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I think I'm within my 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening. Patricia Stein, Scio Township resident. Dr. Feinberg touched on some things regarding the supervisor's behavior. I want to add a few more to that. These are things that wouldn't necessarily be under rules of order, but they would be under board conduct. Supervisor Hathaway, I understand you are the moderator of the meeting, but at that same token, you seem to be taking direction in a single focused way. Well, even the timekeeping. There are other people in the room here that can do the timekeeping. It really doesn't have to be and I stress the word control. Other people can handle that. This way, maybe you could focus more on people's comments, okay? The other thing is, when you make a motion, and you do go right from the agenda and making a motion before anyone else has a chance to speak, and you turn to a trustee or officer and say, will you second my motion? Why isn't it, is there a second? I mean, that's the way they do it in other meetings. They just say, is there a second? You don't turn to someone else and ask them point blank, will you second my motion? The other thing is when you do the round robin with board members speaking, making comments on different items, and you say, okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak? And usually our clerk has her hand up, which you ignore, and then until you finally do turn your head just that little bit of an angle, and you say, well, is there anyone that hasn't spoken yet? No one has their hand up, but what do? You go to them and say, Trustee Jerome, anything to say? He didn't have his hand up. Trustee Courteau, anything? I mean, it sounds like you're coercing them into speaking, and they weren't prepared to speak, but they're called on, so they feel like they must say something, and it's usually nothing of substance. Why don't you just say, is there anyone else, and wait for the hand, just like I do in other meetings? You don't have to coerce the board members to speak. If they don't want to speak, they don't have to. If they want to speak, they can raise their hand, okay? Now, I've been a resident for over 45 years. I always stress that, but today I want to bring home the fact that my husband and I bought our property
30 seconds.
over almost 50 years ago. And in that time, we have gone through a lot of board members. No real waves. But in 18 months, you have really made one hell of a mess of this township. And I only hope that I live long enough to see it fixed. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak during public comment? Seeing no one present, is there someone remote?
There is Jonathan Greenberg, followed by Jillian. Jonathan, you can go ahead.
Hey, Dysfunction Junction, what's your function? Hooking up OMA violations. Hey, Will, you're a real piece of work, and your disrespect to others and highly well-spoken earlier, Caroline and Dr. Feinberg, you are a gaslighter in the extreme. You are disrespectful to your colleagues. You don't even have the decency to look people in the eye when they're speaking because you are embarrassed by your behavior. You are a spoiled, rich kid who grew up to become a failure in life whose only success has been in screwing up Scio Township. You make me sick, sir. You don't listen to others. You do what you want just to get what you want. And if things get in your way, you cheat. You take breaks, and you and Corto go for a walk and tell her how to vote. It's disgusting. I've not been here 45 years. Pat's the OG around here. I've only been here 30-some. You've made a mess of our township. You need to go. And the only reason you didn't was because of COVID and a really, really, really cold winter. Because otherwise, I know plenty of people who would love to see you gone. Please help them out, make us all happy. And Dr. Feinberg, Camp Michigania is a wonderful place. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you. Next is Jillian. Jillian, you can go ahead.
Good evening. Can you
You
hear
can
me?
go ahead. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. I was reading through some of the budget. It kept changing and whatnot, but it's fine. It's a work in progress, I suppose. There's one thing that did catch my eye, and I'm a little confused, and I did some research. This has to do with in there, is that? Okay, sorry. Estimated operating transfers. It says fund 400 no, that's not it. Fund 101 transfer to fund 401. So 400 transfer township-wide road SAD to fund 208, which is the parks and pathways. So that got me thinking. I wanted to know what the 2013 resolution had said. And thank you, Supervisor Hathaway and Fran, for finding that for me. I guess it was on the website. I just was looking for 2013 SAD. It's under a different name. But it says right here that this township board does hereby approve the plans for the improvement of the township's county local road system as prepared and presented. There is nothing in here about sidewalks, pathways, parks, open space, nothing else. By law, that this SAD was voted on for an assessment for 10 years, $85 per parcel for local road maintenance and improvements. You cannot use that money for anything else. And that also goes for any other funds regarding millages. So if it has to do with, let's say, the fire department fund, you can only use that millage for fire department. And you can look these things up in ballot initiative languages. So I'm a little concerned about this, that money is being taken for something that's very important and used somewhere else. Now, I also understand that there's $400,000 left over, and some of that's going to go somewhere, Linda just said. But, you know, we've been talking, rumors have been going around that there's a Park Road township initiated SAD, and that is not true. It's never been initiated. However, there is a part of Park Road that has been talked about being paved after the developers paved theirs. We could use that 400,000 or part of it to pave that road. So it's under a quarter mile. And that's a whole other discussion regarding that Park Road SAD, township initiated, and that road is on the list to be taken care of. And it was stated by Roy Townsend and Luke Kidder that it wasn't. So those people that the 700 that the letter went to, they have been paying $85 for 10 years times 700, let's say letters, that's close to $550,000. That could have paved that little part of Park Road already. But they're going to be double dipped. Thank you.
Jillian, your time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian.
Are there other speakers?
Next is Peter Davis, followed by Diane Vanson. Peter, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Peter Davis, Wagner Road, Scio Township resident. I want to talk about two topics. One involves procedure, the other involves substance. With respect to procedure, I've seen our perfidious supervisor call for a recess after a vote has been called on a motion. That's improper under Robert's Rules of Order, where there's a motion pending and people are going to vote on that motion. You cannot have a recess to discuss how you're going to vote or to persuade others how to vote. Once a motion has been made on a procedural matter, you cannot have a recess. Every trial lawyer will tell you that in a trial or in a deposition where there's a witness on the stand, if a question has been asked of the witness, you may not have a recess or an adjournment when there's a question pending, because bad things happen during those recesses. With respect to the matter of substance, I've taken a look at the budget, but I've not studied it carefully. All I know is that the taxpayers are being gouged. The township is spending money like a drunken sailor. I think that because the township's fiscal year is ending on March 31st, the township should consider putting out for bids all of the contracts with various professionals. You have too many lawyers advising you. You have other people advising you, and I don't know whether they were retained or hired on a no bid contract, but I'd like to see those contracts. I think that citizens have a right to choose the lawyers that will represent them. And I will say, as an aside, I have absolutely zero interest in that job. And I think there are local lawyers that should be consulted and should be asked to bid on a contract to represent the township. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Diane Vanson. Diane, you can go ahead.
Good evening. This is Diane Vanson, 4583 Breezewood Court. Member of the resident of the township for coming on 22 years. First of all, I want to publicly thank Mr. Larson of MLive for his article. It captured the essence of what has been going on in the township, and we really appreciate all his efforts. There are other national organizations that are listening in right now. I want to let you know. I want to also say that I agree very much with Mr. Rowley's recommendations and assessment of the finance team. As you know, I did work for last summer as the HR consultant, and I recommended additional finance support for the township, which fell on deaf ears like things do. It would be very embarrassing if Scio Township would once again miss the date of the office of the audit, ask for an extension, lose ARPA funding, lose grants. And I really don't want to pay any more in taxes to cover the mistakes that I see happening almost every board meeting. So please listen to the professional and Mr. Rowley and take his advice and stop spending so much money on attorneys and spend the money on getting the finances in order. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more Zoom hands.
It looks like we have another person in person who would like to speak.
Just one second.
There you go.
Hi, Kathleen Brandt, Scio resident. For those of you that noticed in the past, last week, Madeline Albright passed away, and I heard a quote from her, which I think is significant to this board. And she stated this on stage, and she said, "There's a special place in hell for women that don't support women." And it's discouraging to me that that's happening in this boardroom, in this board. Now I'm going to move on to some items in the budget. I did notice that the approved position for HR generalist, halftime is not budgeted. I think that is either Fund 270 or Activity 270. That was approved and is not budgeted. I also noticed that in last year's budget, there was a Fund 246, Public Safety and Improvement Fund, and that fund does not appear in the current 2022-23 budget. I don't understand why it's not there. Expenditures were amended for this in March of 2021. So very confusing why that fund is no longer there. Also, I am very concerned about budget amendments not being presented and approved. And some incorrectness in the budget that was presented, again, March 23rd, 2021. A budget amendment occurred that added revenue of $1,848,558 into the Fire Station Capital Fund Project number 431. That is not reflected in this budget. There is an amount of transfer in of 1.5 million, but that does not correlate with this. And further, the lack of approving budget amendments, this was presented to the board a number of times as late as December of this past year, that there was a request to approve amendment to that budget, and that was never passed in this board. That's a statutory problem that's outlined in the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act. So I'm very concerned about how the budget is not being managed appropriately, and just wanted to point out a few things that I found.
Are there further public comments? If not, then we will move on to the consent agenda. Is there a member of the board who's prepared to move the consent agenda at this time? Okay, so moved by Flintoff, support by Courteau. All those in favor of the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The consent agenda is approved. That brings us,
I just had a couple points on procedure, something that came up in public comment.
oh, you wanted to respond to public comment?
Just a point of procedure. I would ask that we do our best not to take any recesses in the middle of an item during this meeting here. And I would also ask if we have an attorney here tonight or not.
I believe we do. Is Mike Homier online?
Could you bring him on for a minute? Just a quick question. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Me, laryngitis again, sorry. So in prior meetings, you've been very helpful when you call out procedures or things that we're about to do in error. And I would ask that you do that again. If you could pay attention, if there's anything you want to chime in on, if there's something out of order, if you could please chime in and note that for the board for this meeting, would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what I do.
Okay, great. Because I realized after the last meeting, when Will introduced that motion to terminate the emergency procurement, it hit me when I was trying to fall asleep that night, that was actually totally out of order. Because it wasn't on the agenda, and it wasn't, it?
There he is. He's alive.
Okay.
Are you able to, could you hear that question
Sorry.
from the clerk?
No, everything froze up, not just for me, but for everybody, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's freezing on occasion, so for everybody, I think, on Zoom. So what was the question?
So I just wanted to note that we had an out-of-order motion last time at a meeting you were present on, and we had never asked you to tune in and pay attention to not be our full-on parliamentarian, but I'm asking you tonight to please pay attention and please call us on anything that you notice that is out of order.
So I'm not sure what was out of order.
At the last meeting, we were discussing the proposal for the finance officer position, Administrator Rowley's proposal, and the board then tabled it, and then Will raised a motion on a separate topic regarding the treasurer and my exercising our authority under our procurement policy to terminate that. That was a totally separate topic. And it wasn't an agenda item, separate topic. It was like throwing a new item on the agenda. It wasn't a motion on David's proposal. David's proposal had nothing to do with that. It was in fact an entirely separate action that the treasurer and I had taken days before. So I realized that. I ran it by a couple people. They agreed with me. If you disagree, we can talk about it at another time. But I just want to say it was noteworthy because it was blatantly out of order. And I was kicking myself for not calling it at the time, because that's what we have to do for each other, is call it at the time. So I just want to ask for your help with that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree that it was out of order, but we can talk about that.
You don't disagree that it was out of order?
I don't agree that it was out of order. I mean, it was a regular meeting of the Township Board. Agendas aren't even required. To the extent that there was a motion, a second, and a vote, I'm not sure you can characterize it as out of order.
So is it your opinion that we can add agenda items as we go?
Yes, if that's the board's purview.
Okay, so we can add agenda items as we go as long as we have a motion.
Look, when the moderator recognizes people to speak, they're free to make motions and have, at least that I've witnessed, on multiple occasions, whether those items have been on the agenda or not.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Unfinished business. This is the discussion of the FYE 2023 budget. And I've asked the Deputy Treasurer, Sandy Egler, to come and highlight the changes, any changes. There aren't that many, but since the public hearing on the budget. And these items should be also literally highlighted in the budget itself. So if you're looking at a copy of the budget, that they should sort of pop out.
First, I'd like to address some of the concerns, if I may, on the budget.
About the budget, sure.
When Fund 400 was created by resolution of the board for the $85 parcel, the intent, and I can't speak the language because I haven't read it in a long time, but I know there's been much discussion, and part of that proposal was to spend 10% of that money on non-motorized activities. So the $200,000 transfer that's in the budget from Fund 400 to Parks and Pathways, the pathway section of that fund, is to be used for non-motorized pathways, consistent with what the board's intent was all along. Fund 246, Public Safety and Improvement Fund, That money was completely consumed in last fiscal year with the fire department renovations, which is why it no longer appears in the budget documents, because it has ended and gone away. Just like when you see next year, the budget request for Fund 401, it will not be there because that fund will be dissolving along about Saturday when the final bond payment is made on Friday. That fund will have used up its usefulness and its life expectancy, and it will go away. Was there another one I'm missing?
Those are the ones that I think I heard.
Can I just add one more thing to your roads clarification?
Sure.
In 2013, for any of you looking at that 2013 resolution, that 10% was not called out as clearly as it should have been. So in 2020, the board went back and made another resolution to make it very clear that in fact 10% of the proceeds could be allocated to transportation alternatives projects. So crosswalks, anything. It's not pathways in particulars, but it's TAP.
Okay, as far as the highlights of the changes since last week. On, I believe it was Saturday, there was an email forwarded from the clerk that gave the new, from the state of Michigan, that gave the new revenue projections, which when I ran the numbers, it would give Scio Township about another $100,000. So I included that in the amendment, or in the projections.
Sandy, I have a question. Are you starting at the beginning, or is this just general commentary right now?
I was just gonna start with, there's very few changes from last week, so I was just going to highlight those, starting with the general fund.
Okay. Can you give us like the lines?
Oh, sure,
Okay.
absolutely. That is 101,528. And if you want the zeros, I can give you the zeros, but it's 101,000,528,000. First page, halfway down, general fund, or a third of the way down. State shared revenue.
I think that's
Or
actually
574.
574.
Sorry, I'm reading wrong, it's been a long day. In 101,265, buildings and grounds, account number 931, building maintenance.
What page are we on?
It's page 14 of the
Sorry,
packet.
I don't have page numbers. Well, 265, buildings and grounds. Account number 931, building maintenance. We added $6,000. We received an email late on Friday from Jan Culbertson that she is securing a grant for the township hall and I believe the fire department, because she said 2 buildings and we only got 2 buildings, to replace the current light fixtures with LEDs. And it will cost the township, give or take, around $5,500, so we just put in an extra $6,000 to give her a little extra cushion. I'm just scrolling here, so bear with me, because I don't remember all of this off the top of my head.
Did you add the drains, activity
Oh,
445?
yes, yep, sorry. Where is that hiding?
That'd be page
Yep, got it.
17 for those looking at.
In 101,445 drains, account number 802, I realized yesterday when I was finishing this up that I had forgot to put in the money that we're gonna have to pay the Water Resources Commission every year when they do their drain assessments. So much is assessed to the property owner, so much is assessed to the township. And I just forgot.
Sandy, where does that usually appear historically?
It would have typically been in 101. 300, 802 county drains. In Fund 232, the tree fund, account number 823, contracted services. The tree fund is a fund that was established we plan to spend some of that money this year in the works. It's not done yet, but it's in the works. So we increased that line item.
Both the Parks Advisory Board and the Sustainability Task Force are talking about making a bigger effort to try and use some of that fund.
Give me a second, I gotta reconnect. In Fund 402, the Township-wide road revolving fund, under account number 823.3, construction roads, we added the 117,600, which would be the other 50% of Dino Drive.
35? Sandy, can you remind me? I always get confused about 402. Where it came from and what its purpose is.
Fund 402 was created a number of years back when the Downtown Development Authority paid to pave one of the roads in their district.
I think it was April.
April? I can never remember the roads. And then the township specially assessed the property owners on that road 50% of the value of that construction cost and donated it, creating the revolving fund. The original intention was to use this fund, just as it says, as a revolving fund to loan money to neighborhoods that would like to repave their roads, but the project doesn't cost a lot of money, and so bonding was out of the question. And in fact, it has done just that in the past.
Thank you.
Certainly. I think that, oh, I just remembered another question that somebody raised. The $1.5 million transfer in to the fire capital project fund. When the board looked last spring at redoing the fire department building, they did it in two phases.
Sandy, it was spring 2020. It was.
Okay, well, 2 years ago then. They did the plan in two phases. Phase one, the fire department had enough money to pay for directly. Phase two, they did not. So they had to secure financing in one way or another. The township decided it would be too expensive to bond when the general fund had enough money to loan the fire department for this. The cash has long since been transferred, but the accounting showing the activity transfer has not happened. The money had to go from the general fund to loan to the fire fund, and then the fire fund has to transfer it to the capital projects fund to pay those bills. This is cleaning up that. And this will be another fund that will not appear in next year's budget request, as the construction will be over and this fund will have served its purpose and go away.
It would be nice to have notes about that in the budget so we wouldn't be confused.
So Sandy, I think there were two other.
Okay, help me out here, because I'm forgetting where they're at.
It's revenue, so it's a little different. It's under the sewer fund, 590.
Oh, yes.
The water fund.
I hadn't got there yet.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Uh-oh. Hold on, it's not. Okay. Let's try
The other one is the water fund, which.
591.
It should be the same account number, just.
Oh, is it the same account number?
Yes, it's the same account number because you must use the same account number in each fund for the same purpose.
Okay, and 695, those are the two places to look for the
So
additional
at the
revenue.
very bottom of the water and sewer revenue pages, second from the bottom is 695, contributed capital developer. There is two separate development agreements with some developers where they have agreed, one developer has agreed to give us $1 million. The other developer has agreed to give us 8,000? Or did we mess that up?
I'm not sure these numbers add up to the total that is coming in, actually, but
That's what I'm thinking, I messed that
I
up.
believe it's about 240,000 from Scio. Actually, we have someone from Scio here who probably knows better.
This fiscal year.
Yeah, it should be, it should be this fiscal
Is
year.
it this fiscal year?
It is anticipated it will arrive in next fiscal year, which is late breaking news, which is why we tried to add it, and apparently I messed up the number.
It's close.
But we were trying to do this late Friday and get these still out on time, and well, it was late Friday.
I think the number in water is a little higher, but you know, it's revenue. It's
Right.
if it comes in higher, then it's not.
There's no harm, no foul if revenue comes in more than projected.
Exactly. I believe in both cases, we checked the development agreements, and as far as we can tell from the development agreements, these funds should come during this fiscal year based on the terms of those agreements.
So those are Those are all of the changes that we made with one big exception. And that is the cost allocation numbers. So
Yeah, okay.
the original communication from the clerk late last week, when we were originally preparing the budgets, or late the previous week, was that to leave those items blank, but the expectation was that they were gonna be very similar to the current fiscal year. When they actually came in, they were significantly different, much, significantly increased from the current year. There were, in one fund, as I had mentioned, in Fund 401, since that fund is dissolving, there is no money left to pay for cost allocation. There should be no reason to have a cost allocation. And in fact, that is one of the transfers from the general fund to that fund, because when all is said and done, that fund doesn't quite have enough money to make that final bond payment, so the money must come from the general fund. And there was conversations that I had, questions I had fielded from people about the cost allocation and its, whether it should or should not be in some of the funds. One of those was the Land Preservation Fund. My argument, my decision on that one was that they do need to pay for some of the audit costs because they have a millage, they have to be audited. And so I put in a nominal amount to cover that. The other road special assessment funds, again, there should be a nominal cost in those funds to cover their share of the audit. But what was being proposed, I believed, and in consultation with the supervisor, he agreed that the amount that was being proposed was too large and could not be sustained by those funds. Because what's gonna happen when we get down to the end of those funds, if they don't have enough money, the general fund's gonna have to pay the money over to those funds to make the final payments. Or in the case where the funds have been loaned by the general fund's just not gonna get all their money back anyway. So putting a very large cost allocation into those funds does not make a lot of fiscal sense, in my mind. Just like there are other funds we do not spread cost allocation to, we don't spread it to the Fire Capital Projects Fund because it does not make sense. Another one of the funds that had a very large increase that is simply just not sustainable was the fire fund. And that fund, because of the remodeling and the large loan to the township, from the township, the fire the fire department committed to repay a minimum of $75,000 each year to the general fund to repay that 1.5 million over 20 years. Which means they must pass a budget at least 75,000 in the black every year. It just simply wasn't going to be possible if we increased their cost allocation to the presented number. So what the decision that Will and I made was that we would set all of the cost allocation, with the exceptions of the ones that I had noted, back to this year's level, and you guys were gonna have to discuss it. Sorry. But that was all the changes that was in this document versus the previous document.
Are there any questions for the deputy treasurer? Clerk Flintoff and then trustee Cortell.
What is the significance of where there's a footnote and where there's a not?
Which fund are you looking at, please?
Well, I'll start with 590 and 591.
Okay. The reason, the footnotes in those two funds on the revenue page is because 590 and 591, which is sewer and water, are enterprise funds. All of the other funds are governmental funds. The difference between the two is the governmental funds work like a checkbook. If you don't have it, you can't spend it, and when you do spend it, it's an expense. You do not buy assets. The enterprise funds, which is sewer and water, are business type funds, which means when they buy something big or do a large expensive project, those will never hit your revenue and expenditure reports. They are not budgetable. So what we do is we list the items that the utilities director anticipates spending money on.
Right.
That are not a budgetable item because they're going to be buying an asset.
So and I don't know, Will, if you want to get into the details of some of these now. Like, I'm wondering about the Liberty Road water main. You know, that I know is a hot topic. We need to identify how we're going to pay for phase 2 and 3 of that. So.
Isn't that a sort of a separate item? That's a capital improvement.
Right. That's what she's talking about.
I know.
Right.
But it's money we need to plan to spend this year, probably in the next couple months.
It's money that has to be talked about, yes. It's a project that needs to be discussed, yes.
Right, so we need to have a capital project budget conversation on that. Is that also true for these others, Sandy? I mean, because there's also small things like the air compressor. Would all of these be in a separate capital budget? Would that be a recommendation?
We're not in a capital budget, no. They're in the water and sewer budgets, or water and sewer funds.
In the funds.
So what that means is when the utilities director comes to the board and says, I would like to buy 2 electric vehicles. There's not going to be a budget line item for those vehicles. It's simply the board authorizing a purchase to buy an asset that will then later be depreciated. So there's not a capital fund. It happens within the water and sewer fund.
This was part of the confusion as we were trying to sort out this question of the electric vehicles, and it sort of has different implications in the 2 different budget areas that where they're to be purchased.
Correct.
Maybe after we finish going through and asking questions, we can sort of have that discussion, and if you're available, then if there's further questions, we can direct them to you. But I saw that I don't want to cut you off if you had more questions. Okay. Trustee Corto, you had your hand raised as well.
Thank you. Just a brief question, clarification for buildings and grounds 265. The expenditures, you noted the addition of the $6,000 to cover replacing the light fixtures. But I just wanted to clarify that there is an Eagle grant being applied for that's going to cover up to $25,000 or so of that expense. If I understand correctly, maybe I don't know the numbers. Do you know what that total grant might be?
Hold on, let me find Jan's email.
I think that if I recall, Jan emailed to say that she had run the numbers again and had found that there was a need for additional funding from the township to sort of fill in a gap between what was likely to be obtainable through the grant and what the township would have to put in order to complete the conversion of the light fixtures to energy efficiency.
But I just wanted to clarify what that amount is of the grant that will be
Let me read you what she wrote. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute, that's not the right one. Hold on. Will, did that come to you, or did it directly, or did it come to me directly, or did it come through you? Okay, that's why I have, all right, hold on, that's why I couldn't find it.
I don't seem to have an internet connection that's active.
I will find it in just a minute, I just needed to know where it came, how it came through. Came in on Friday.
If you got it, I forwarded it to you.
Yeah, that's why. I'm still looking, I get a lot of emails.
While you're looking, then the follow-up question would be.
I can multitask.
Should we then, under revenues for buildings and grounds 265, have an account number 539, which would be the grant anticipated?
Yes, that we will need that,
If we get the grant.
This came in so late that we really didn't have time to digest it. So, because ultimately what will happen is if we get this grant, revenue will go up, expenditures will go up, and they will offset the difference by the 6,000 or 5,500, whatever that final number comes in at. So it was easier to just put in the effect of the amount rather than worry about the entire thing, because I just didn't have time to try to digest the whole thing.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Because literally it came in as we were trying to get these out and posted for consideration.
So do we ordinarily create lines in the budget for grants that we've only applied for?
It's inconsistent.
No, we really wouldn't. We would wait till we actually got it.
Yeah.
So, it was, for whatever reason, I'm not finding it. I know it came in on Friday. Wasn't it Friday?
Well, if we locate that information later, we can circle back.
Okay, I'll keep looking.
Okay, are there other questions for trustee Noel?
Well, I had several questions. And some of these came from the Budget and Finance Committee meeting when there was discussion that this will be discussed when we discuss our budget. So it's a range of different questions, but there was question about how revenue was estimated. What was that estimate based on? I don't remember which specific fund this was referring to. It was a general discussion.
When I'm looking at doing the budgets, there's many things that I look at. When it comes to state shared revenue, I look to the state. I go out on the state's website, I look at their most recent projections. When it comes to tax revenue, we typically take what we have received in the current year and then adjust that by the state's inflationary rate that they've already given us, which this year was 3.3%. When it comes to general type revenues like planning fees or things like that, we look at history and then we look at, you know, are we on an uptick in development? Are we on a downtick in development? And we make a judgment call.
When you say we, like who was?
Well, whoever is the people working on a particular segment of the budget.
I think trustee Noel still has the floor.
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that you're still speaking.
Okay. So is our revenue actually higher than it was in the budget? That came up in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. There was discussion about that.
You mean, will our ending revenue be higher than what's in the amended request?
Yes.
Hopefully. But honestly, there's no real way to know because, you know, we have to prepare these long before the end of the month. So when I'm looking at these, any budget item, you look at what has come in and then you look at what typically comes in between the point you're looking at and the end of the fiscal year, and you take a stab at it. So when it comes to revenue, I don't like to overestimate, because if we're looking at expenditures based on an overestimate of revenues, then it's going to give the board a false sense of security if that revenue doesn't come in at that higher level. So it's good if your revenue comes in higher than you had projected that it would.
Are your estimates conservative, do you think?
I'm always conservative when budgeting. I'm as realistic as conservatively possible, if that makes any sense.
Okay, and I know there was this discussion about the various millages and when they will expire and how much is left in various funds. And somebody was going to prepare a list of when the various millages expire.
It's in the proposed budget we did last year. I don't have it on me.
But I mean for this year, not last year.
Well, I can tell you that in 2022 will be the last year for the township-wide road SAD. That fund will not necessarily disappear for the 23-24, because I don't find it realistic to expect them to spend everything next fiscal year. But if that is not renewed, that fund will have a very short life following that. There are some of the SAD, the road SAD funds, for the local roads that will either be expiring next year or shortly thereafter. They're 10-year SAD funds, so like Park Road, our last collection was this last December. There may be another one that is next year, but I off the top of my head, I don't remember.
And then under sewer, there were questions about connection fees and user fees.
Yes. Sewer and water have been operating in the red for many years. And last year, the board increased the user fees, and most notably, I believe, the debt fee. I don't believe you adjusted the tap fees. Those need to be looked at. And, to be point blank, the administration needs to start looking at water and sewer rates and determine at what time frame to get the budget back in the black rather than the red, and start implementing those rate increases on a regular basis until there's enough revenue to cover the expenditures.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is something this board worked on. We increased both fees and rates. And so I think that the rate increase is not included in here, if I'm.
No, there is. If you look at the revenue under 590 or 591, it doesn't matter. Account number 630. Sewer, for example, there's an extra $200,000 in here.
How did you come up with that?
It was extremely difficult to judge what the rate increase was going to be at the time we were looking at it because water and sewer billing was so far behind. The only real way to know is looking at how much you're selling in the months since the increase was put into play. And we just didn't have very much data to go on. So I am hoping that the actual number is much more than that. But at the time we were trying to figure it out, we just didn't have enough data to accurately guess.
We also have an annual increase for the debt service.
I'm not unaware of how that fee was structured, because there's one of two ways to do that. You can either look at your annual debt payment and, divide by the number of users, and, Scio's got commercial versus residential, so it's a little bit more complicated than that. Or you can take the entire debt payment cycle and say, okay, for the next 20 years, our total bond payment is this, and divide it by the 20 years and have a smooth. So there's two ways to do it, and I was not involved in those calculations, so I don't know how you guys did it.
Right, but we did pass a resolution, 2 resolutions.
Okay,
So I'm not putting this on you, Sandy. I'm just saying.
Well, the
We already
utility
decided.
director should be the one to put that in the budget.
So I'm just saying, this is a good example of something we passed a resolution on in June for certain fees with a new fee schedule. Okay, I'm looking at it now. You're right about the tap fees we hadn't looked at, but a lot of the other fees. And then 2 in August, that's where we addressed the user fees.
I remember. Sandy probably doesn't because that's when she was out sick.
But regardless, it's a resolution
Yes.
we've done, and we need to include these in our revenues if we want our actions to have meaning.
The water and sewer budgets are the responsibility of the utilities director.
I'm not pointing fingers.
I'm just saying. it's
I'm
not-
saying that we need to, I'm just saying, it's not fully incorporated in here, so.
Treasurer Plummer.
I just want to clarify something.
Yeah.
The only fund is water that has debt payments. Sewer is not a bond, has
Right.
no loans, no bonds. Just the water fund.
Are there further questions or comments for our Deputy Treasurer? Are there other comments that people would like to make with regard to this discussion of the budget?
Are we gonna go fund by fund, or?
I don't know that we necessarily need to go fund by fund, but if people have things that they would like to, issues that they would like to raise.
I would like to, well, if we're not gonna go fund by fund, I would at the appropriate time talk about the cost allocation, so we can discuss that matter.
Well, then let's talk about cost allocation.
I mean, it might be helpful to go fund by fund, and if we don't want to discuss some fund, we could go on to the next one.
Or we can start with cost allocation, either way, it'll cut into it. It's all related.
Well, it seems like cost allocation is a question that has been raised in a variety of ways. Why don't we begin with that?
Great. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen to share the cost allocation plan. This isn't usually something board talks about, but it sounds like we want to make some adjustments. So very briefly, the township has long, and Sandy can give the history on how long, has long shared costs of IT, buildings and grounds, and finance. Those are the three main buckets, okay? So they're very basic shared costs. It's not like admin or some fluffy overtime. There's very few concrete costs. And I don't have in front of me the formula. I know Sandy, we used to say divide the township manager's time across multiple funds in an estimated proportion. We don't do that with the administrator right now. We used to take some portion of funding, some quote-unquote rent from the enterprise funds, 590 and 91 to 101. And we would take a portion of the finance director and finance manager, Sandy, Rebecca, and Howard's time, and split them across. I'm looking at you for confirmation I have this right. 101, fire, sewer, and water.
You're correct with the accounting time, incorrect with Howard's time. Maintenance was only for this building.
Okay.
So it was only spread between 101, 590, and 591.
Okay, thank you. So last year, we implemented a cost allocation plan to kind of formalize what we've been doing year after year. And what we noticed was, and I think I sent out the whole plan from last year, and it worked out really nicely, actually, when we actually looked at the actual costs. I just have the hard copy of last year's if you want it. But what it allows us to do is budget the shared costs and then deduct it 1/12 at a time with our monthly reconciliations. So that, say, the water fund isn't getting hit at the end of the year with our catching up on accounting, which is taking 1/12 the shared costs. The other thing we wanted to do was make sure that we had a basis that was justifiable, that we could point to data and say, here is why we're splitting it this way, okay? So we did that last year, and now I'm gonna show you what we did this year. So these are the allocation units, the things that we, and let me back up too. David, Donna, Will, and I know Sandy was unable to make it, we had a meeting on the cost allocation plan and decided we'd use the same elements we did last year and do it this year. What changed with this year is some of the numbers went up more than I expected, and so that's what's causing this conversation. So the finance director position, it's some split of employees and money spent. These are the data sources for, and I used calendar year 2021, so you can pull them all. These are actual data, so you actually have widgets of how much work was done. Finance director, finance manager, any finance consultants we use, the required audit and actuary services, the deputy treasurer, this is new this year, just insofar as the cash receipting function, because we had included the cash receipting function in last year's cost allocation when the finance manager did that. IT, buildings and grounds, okay? So these are all numbers tied to it. So then we do a whole calculation, right? The allocated department, we say finance director, the level of effort, 75% is tied to the dollar spent, 25% is calculated by number of employees. Finance manager, spread out between number of AP checks, number of employees, and amount spent. Financial consultants, really split between number, 75% amount spent, number of employees. Audit and actuary, I did calculate as 100% expenditures, but Sandy, it sounds like you've got a different view of that we could tweak how that's adjusted. Deputy treasurer, 40% on cash receipting, so that's tied to the actual number of cash receipts we pull in. 40% I just kept from last year. Finance manager was at 40% cash receipting. Buildings and grounds, IT, okay? So then you get certain dollars to be allocated, and this is how you get the split across the funds. So you actually, this is the actual data, right? And what you see is fire, parks, open space spent a lot more money last year than they have in the past. So that's what contributes to the increase. It's still proportionate, but it is an increase. You'll also see that this plan doesn't penalize, you don't have funds paying for computers for funds that don't use computers, right? Open space doesn't use computers. There's no fund charge for that. Township hall space split between general, 590, 591. The AP checks, cash receipting, the size of the fund balance, working capital, number of employees, again, those are mostly in fire, general, water, sewer. And then the expenditures. So all of this gets calculated up here. It's not to say we can't change it, but what this comes down to is a question of fairness and what's appropriate. When year after year we have general fund deficits, we have other new funds we create, I think they should be paying for some level of appropriate support. There can be different formulas, but people need, I think the other funds should kick in for some level of support, so we can calculate it differently. But I will remind you, these are the same costs we've always spread across funds, it's just how we do it.
Trustee Cortell.
Thank you. I really appreciate the clear explanation of the costs. I don't, in principle, disagree with allocating some costs, but I do feel very strongly that assigning cost allocations to special and millage funds is counter to the intent of voters who passed those millages specifically in order to fund very specific goals. In some cases, the millage ordinances allows only direct administrative costs. For example, the open space millage ordinance languages says that the only administrative costs that are allowed are directly related to land evaluation, acquisition, and conservation easement acquisition. So it seems to me that it's counter to the intent of that millage to have a more general assessment of sharing the finance. The whole purpose, it feels to me.
You think it should be 0%, except for the audit?
Except, the audit is fair.
Actuary.
That's absolutely fair, but I
No, not
believe
actuary, just audit.
for open space, for parks and pathways, for the bus fund, for the special assessment funds, and for parks and pathways, all of those were passed by the voters for very specific purposes, not as a way to help fund our general government. So I hear you on the need to work on our general fund spending, but for me, a general principle is all of those things that are you cited here are core government functions that would be happening with or without these special funds. Maybe not to quite the same level, but they would be happening. And so for me, going back to the intent of the millages and special funds, I believe that other than audit costs, that we should not be assigning the general cost allocation.
So if you look up there, this is like the best indication of workload, right? I mean, an indication. So what about all the AP, all the grants management? I mean, grants management's separate, but AP, like look at parks and paths. I mean, there's work happening.
I understand that. You know, Parks and Pathways does have a lot of expenses with the AP. I do though, again, the millage, the intent of the millage was to fund a specific activity, and to me, this feels like indirect administrative costs that are then being
I think it's direct.
placed on that.
It's a good debate. I mean, I think of it as direct. We'd have to look fund by fund. I think open space is the one where I can see your point the most. Parks and paths, we explicitly put in, admin. I think open space.
The bus fund, I just don't understand how the bus fund is using a lot of resources. That was for bus use. I mean.
Yeah, well, it takes, the voters never would have passed the bus fund if they didn't think there was somebody there to administer the bus fund, is another perspective. So it's $4,800. I don't think that's a lot. I mean, there's different ways to cut it, but we're running a general fund deficit and we can't keep going out and asking voters to fund special things if we don't, and this doesn't even get to the real administrative costs. So we're not going to solve this tonight, but I would strongly advocate for a fair plan across funds, because my observation was, before we started doing this, it was just which fund on the board had enough political support for the ones that got exempted. And that's not right either. You need to look at it with some sort of, metrics. They can be different metrics.
My general thought was millage funds or special funds, like some of the road assessment funds that were approved for a specific purpose, should be dedicated to that purpose with only the most direct costs. Now, if we were to use Parks and Pathways millage to hire half a staff person, that person then would be an administrative cost, and that person should be handling many of these administrative functions. And so in that sense, some of that would be included in that.
Well, that's a good example. The person that would be hired wouldn't be doing any of what I'm talking about here. We would still have all these costs because they wouldn't be managing the money. They wouldn't be managing the computers. They wouldn't be managing the space. All of these costs exist. And so, we agreed a month ago, on using this same plan. I understand that people feel surprised at the numbers. We can make a tweak here or there. But if we're gonna do an overhaul of a plan, if you wanna volunteer to sit down with me, we can work on it and come back. We can just put the cost allocation on hold, come back with a new plan.
How can we put the cost allocation on hold if we're going to approve the budget tonight?
Budget amendment. A budget amendment.
Yeah.
It's fine.
That's what we've been doing for years.
Doing the cost allocation as a budget amendment?
No.
They happen though.
No, but we can. It sounds like there's a good discussion. We can have a committee on cost allocation, come back with a new plan, and deliberate and adopt it as a budget amendment.
I wanted to say something
Oh,
else.
It's not a big deal.
It seems like in some of these funds, the individuals are deriving a benefit that the township is providing.
Of course.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think we need to look at each fund.
Yeah.
And have a discussion about each fund.
Because when we exempt the millages, Jackie, I saw water and sewer getting too hard of a hit. And there are enterprise funds, and that's not right. We really need to have only their costs in there. So that's a bigger danger to me than taking some admin out of a millage.
Well, I think part of the problem with taking the funds for the much higher cost allocation from Parks and Pathways in particular is that there's an ongoing debate we're not going to resolve tonight about staffing. And the Parks and Pathways millage it has a particular challenge in that there's a 15% cap on administrative costs. So when
That was me.
I remember.
Yeah.
So the reality of that we're living with is that there's about $127,000 a year for administrative costs as a part of the Parks and Pathways millage.
Right.
And you quickly, with, the different
Well,
things
this
that
is
we.
26,000 would be for Parks and Paths,
The
the cost allocation.
Yes, exactly. So that's.
Yeah, so there's still 100,000.
If I could speak.
Sure.
The jump in from last year was, I think the cost allocation figure from last year was about $9,000.
Yeah.
So it's quite a jump. And when we saw that kind of an increase, and that's just one example, when we saw that kind of an increase, that really was startling, in particular because we just a few days earlier had a conversation about how the numbers weren't going to change very much in terms of cost allocation. So to see those kinds of changes at the same time that we're wrestling with how are we going to fund the staff support that both Parks Advisory Board and the Transportation Alternative Planning Committee are seeking out of a millage that has this kind of a cap in it, it sort of throws a monkey wrench into that discussion. And maybe the solution is what you're suggesting, Clerk Flintoff, and that is to sort of take this question of cost allocation like we're taking the hiring for different positions and sort of deferring that discussion until a later time, and then coming back with budget amendments. Maybe that's the best way to handle this.
Can I, just one point of information.
Sure.
Parks and Paths, it was always gonna go up, because we only had we voted it in August 2020. So we hadn't been operating. It had only that first 800,000 at the time we adopted last year's budget. So it was artificially low.
I'm not sure I understand.
So we only had 800,000 in.
So you're saying that because there's more money
It was
in the
halfway
fund, the cost allocation has gone up?
Correct. So there's methods to the allocation.
Well, yes, we're learning that. You and David and Donna and I met on the night.
Right, we went over
We
this.
went over this. I don't know that I would characterize that we agreed it on any particular plan. We didn't object to going forward using this method.
The same method as we used
Right,
before.
and you explained
So these are-
roughly how it works,
Yeah.
but you weren't able to actually explain the formulas. We just sort of went
I-
over it
I
in a
explained-
general way.
I explained the formulas. I hadn't entered all this data. What I'm telling you, Parks and Paths, Fire, and Open Space spent more
Well,
last year in 2021 than they did in 2020.
Well, and what I'm saying is, that was on the 9th of February, and we were expecting to have, much more discussion of these numbers, and a chance to sort of absorb the, whatever the outcome was of running the formulas, to get it, the day before we're meeting in a special meeting to
Well-
approve the budget doesn't really allow a lot of time for
You
discussion.
asked for it by Friday. I was busy
We asked
getting
for
the
it,
AP.
we asked for it way before Friday. That
And
was
I-
not the first time that we asked for it.
Right, so surprise, surprise, I have too much work to do and I'm behind on my assignments. I had more urgent things going on. I sent this Sunday morning regardless. What I'm saying is, these are the costs. So the other thing that's gone up, these are the real costs. If you want to reduce your cost allocation, if you take it away from one fund, it's got to go somewhere else.
I have a
Yeah.
point or
Sure.
a question.
Go ahead.
When we're looking at cost numbers as some of these funds, when they started out, I'd say pathways.
Yeah.
And as the work has increased, the costs have increased, but it doesn't cost any more to type and send a check for $100 versus $1,000.
That's right.
It's just a point, because we're working with numbers, adding number cost. But that's a piece too, that
Well, Donna, and that's why we consider the actual number of AP checks and the number of cash receipts.
But, yes, I understand, but you can have 5 checks you've got to mail out.
Yep.
Okay. This year, it was X number of dollars on the check totals.
Yep.
This year, it's X number of dollars on the check totals. But it didn't cost us any more to type those checks and get them issued.
I believe this accounts for your point.
Okay.
Because we're using all of these methods here. So for example, the checks, number of AP checks. I looked at the number of AP checks across fund. All right? So what is that, 25? So right here, 20% of the finance manager's time is spent doing AP. Okay? Now look up here. That right there takes that proportion, the distribution of AP checks across funds, the number of AP checks actually cut in each fund, and puts it right here. So what is the cost of cutting those checks? $1,812. It's $1,812 to cut 125 checks. So if you, I don't know if you really want to, the level of effort is pretty well understood. You could look at audit and actuary. I think, that is 100% done by expenditure, size of fund balance, actually. But Donna, you see what I mean about the 20%?
Well, I understand how you're coming up with this.
Yeah.
I do. But another point to this discussion is our general fund, which is way back when, every township started out with a general fund, a trust and agency, and a tax collection. That's all there was. The people, over time, they've approved money for the general fund. Now, that money is to run the township. We have all of these special requests now, I'm putting it this way because the voters asked for it and the voters approved it. I agree with Jackie that they approved that pot of money, preserve land, to have a bus route, to provide pathways. But I do believe that general fund monies to run the township should take care of administering those funds. I really do. I think it's part of the philosophy of township government, general fund. It's just my thought on it. I'm not saying it's right or
Yeah,
wrong.
Donna, I think we should have another longer conversation about this whole thing. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I just think it's a direction we have to go in.
Well, I think as a whole,
As a whole.
team.
As a whole,
Yes.
because we used to always split township manager. We used to always split these other costs, so this is not new. What is
I'm not saying
new,
it's new, I'm just telling my philosophy,
Yeah.
what I think is.
but your philosophy
generally-
is different than what we've done in recent.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
But that's okay,
rather
it's a
than
discussion.
just getting into a back and
It's a
forth,
discussion.
are there others who have comments? Trustee Noel?
Okay, so on a slightly different aspect of this, the issues with the water and sewer fund, I think I'm the only board member who lives in the southeastern corner of the township. And, you know, my neighbors are all on municipal water and sewer. I am getting a lot of questions about the water rates going up.
Yeah.
And I know they're going to go up again. I would like to have a better understanding of some of these issues. So this merits discussion, and I know the idea of having the enterprise funds contribute back is, I want to have a better understanding of that too, because I have some concerns about that.
And I will just say what we've done the last 2 years reduces what I think has been an unfair burden on 590 and 591.
Sandy,
Deputy Treasurer,
they
please.
have to pay for themselves.
I'm going to respectfully challenge that statement.
Okay, hers or mine?
Or the clerks. Prior to this formula being used, when we decided what amount of money water and sewer would contribute for what, we looked at many things. At the time, the maintenance person's time was being spent not only in taking care of this building, but in taking care of the mowing and weed whipping, the pump stations, lift stations, well houses, whatever it is water and sewer has, as well as assisting the guys in the field when they needed that help. So his wages were split accordingly by what everybody agreed he was spending his time doing. The water and sewer themselves was being charged $15,370 each per year as rent for their share and use of the building, the electricity, the gas. And then they were being charged 15% of the accounting time staff to take in the money and write the checks and pay the bills. They were actually being charged less than they are under this measure.
Actually, buildings and grounds it's $3,300 less under this model. So it's $12,053 for buildings and grounds as opposed to $15,300.
I'm saying in general, they were paying less.
And another thing with water and sewer, it's like a business. All costs associated with it has to be paid for by the business. And that's, you mentioned the cost of the user fees. What we pay Ann Arbor, the users have to pay, which we can renegotiate, but someday. So yes, it's a challenge because technically we're a very small system in comparison. So our utility, our water and sewer is expensive, as you well know, as a user.
No matter what we do, we gotta treat everybody fairly and be very transparent and have a legally justifiable way of doing this.
We do. We do, so.
Well, are there comments about cost allocation, other questions about other aspects of the budget as proposed?
I would just suggest on the cost allocation, could we, I don't know if it'd be budget and finance, David, or Jackie, if you just want to get together, we can look at it, and anybody else who's interested in come back.
I think there seems to be interest in having discussion about the cost allocation.
Because I do think we need to go millage by millage. I think it depends on the language.
I would be happy to have that conversation. I wonder whether it should be a full board conversation or whether.
Whatever people want to do.
Whether we want to do a committee. I mean, because part of it is the details and part of it is our general interpretation and what we as a board feel is an appropriate policy. I mean, apart from the legality, what do we as a board want to embrace as the policy
Agreed.
resolution?
It's a policy decision. We decided to continue on this path because we've always split these costs.
Right, and
So,
as a matter of policy, we can revisit.
no, we
previous
can, I
decisions.
know. But what I'm just saying is in the small group a month ago, that was but it clearly is not what you want to do, so.
I'm sorry, I wasn't part of that small group,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so do you want to
Well,
maybe,
we're just discussing at this point. Are there further comments on the budget as proposed?
I did have a question on the DDA.
So that would be the last page of the budget. Page 49.
This discussion originated in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. And maybe you can talk about the capture issue. There was comment that 50% is high. I'd like some background information on that.
Certainly. When the DDA was formed, well, let me back up. When a DDA is formed, the state says a DDA may capture 100% of all revenue, or revenue generated through millages on any value above the base. The base is the value within the DDA, the proposed district on the date of its creation. So our DDA was created probably 1985-ish because.
Not that far back. That was before me, and I was in here. Yes.
Okay. Well, all I know is the water and sewer went in
Yes.
1985 because that's when my son was born. And my son.
No, you're right there, but the
And
DDA
my
was
husband
in the
actually put the
90s.
water and sewer in. So the DDA was created in that timeline, okay? Somewhere in the mid-80s. At the time the DDA was created, they made the agreement with the units, all the taxing units, that what they would do is split back 50% of its capture. Thereby, the net effect is they would only capture percent of what they were legally allowed to capture. And it may be high in comparison to other DDAs, but it's just the way it was created and set up.
When the DDA, the purpose of ours was to get potable water to our border because of contamination from either end of Jackson Road. And second was to address the traffic situation, which was growing by day as a nightmare. So we chose the boulevard design. And then the DDA board at that time, there was a couple of people who really, well, they were all good people, but there was a couple that were just really finance planners. But they worked together as their board and projected out. They knew how long it would take to pay for these improvements. So they worked with those numbers to determine what we needed to capture. It was all a total picture.
And in fact, in 1994, when Proposal A was passed by the voters in Michigan, that increased the sales tax and created the state ed fund, at that point in time, the state of Michigan said that there would be no more capture on any school. So Ann Arbor schools, Dexter schools, WISD. That capture was prohibited once any bond payment that was established as of 1994 was paid off. So effective 2014, the DDA was no longer allowed to capture from any of the schools, which greatly reduced the amount of money they were able to collect each year, which has greatly changed the projects that they have worked on. You know, they're still debating whether phase 4 of the boulevard, taking it all the way to Parker Road, will ever happen or not. And there are other, you know, like doing North Z Road, they're in great discussions over whether that project should be undertaken to fix that road.
I think it was 1988.
The DDA created?
Yeah, I think so.
That would be right, because
All I know is the pipe was going in the ground in
87, I know
1985.
and it was early that the talk started.
Does that answer the question that you?
It does. So just looking at the chart here, the current fund balance for the DDA is what?
Current fund balance going into the current fiscal year was 278,619.69. However, what is built into that number is the give or take $20 million that they have paid for the boulevard. Because a few years back, there was accounting rules changes, and the DDA was no longer treated as a governmental type fund, and it became an enterprise type fund for accounting purposes. So we had to go back in time and say the value of Jackson Boulevard was $22 million, and we had to list that as an asset and depreciate it. So you can't really go by the fund balance in the DDA. It means nothing.
You can't do it in any fund. You look at cash if you really want to see concrete what you can do. You look at income or revenue, I should say.
Trustee Knoll, did you have further questions?
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to suggest, this is a good time for taking a brief recess, and then when we return, we can turn to new business. If we can make a motion for a recess. Moved by Cortot, support by McLaughlin. All in favor of a 5-minute recess, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. 5-minute recess. Going back to order. And at this point, I'd like to move on to new business. The first item is the action on the amendments to the township budget for the 2021-22 fiscal year. And Deputy Treasurer Egler, if I could call on you again so you can explain to the board as a whole what you explained to me as we were working on this about how the amendments are represented in the budget.
When I created this worksheet, I looked at the general ledger as to line item by line item, what was recorded as the budget at that moment in time. So this would have been early January. So anything that was posted in the general ledger as a budget amendment, as of, I think it was right around January the 7th, is what is reflected as the current budget. If there was anything that was done after that, I did not record that.
And just to clarify, we didn't make any budget amendments after the point where I sent you that spreadsheet and we confirmed that. So it should be current.
You're saying these numbers should be good?
No, I'm saying, but the amended budget in the revenue and expenditure report is what Sandy was looking at.
Correct.
So what Sandy has, just to clarify, what is our amended budget in our revenue expenditure reports is shown as the original budget in the budget document.
Well, it's not shown as the original budget, it just says approved.
Approved.
It doesn't
Thank
say
you.
original.
Thank you.
So this, when you say original budget, you mean the one that came up a week ago?
No. In the center of the document, what says 21-22 approved is the way the budget stood when this document was created on or about January 7th. So if there was a budget amendment after that point in time, or posted after that point in time, it would not be reflected in these numbers.
So Sandy, you're going from January 7th. Okay. I think that was when we confirmed all this. I mean, we made the last budget amendments. Well, I'll just pull it. Keep going.
So, if I may, Sandy,
Sure.
my understanding is that in approving the amendments requested, does that column encompass, I'm trying to figure out from what you were just saying, if my understanding of our earlier conversation is correct, and that the amendments to the fiscal year ending 2022 budget are represented in the column that's labeled 21-22 amendment requested?
If they were in the general ledger when this document was created.
Which you said was January 7th?
I said on or about, yes.
Okay.
That's when this current process began in earnest.
That's when the current process began, and, you know, there's time constraints. You can't hit a moving target, so if the target moved, there was no way for me to hit it, okay?
Right, exactly.
But in passing this motion tonight, if you approve a motion to adopt this document as the amended budget, it would replace, if there is a difference in the numbers, it would replace whatever was prior to tonight. So it wouldn't matter if a number went from 500 to 10,000 to 2,000 to 12,000. If this final number is 15,000, that's where the number is going to be set.
Okay, so the model motion for accomplishing the adoption of, or the approval of the budget amendments as written is to approve the consolidated township budget amendments for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022 as presented or amended. I would make the motion as presented. Is there a second? So second. Is there discussion of the motion to adopt the amendments to the current fiscal year budget? Clerk Flintoff.
I would make a friendly suggestion, just to make it really clear. Because Sandy, for example, I do know, on January 25th, with the big Zeeb Road, there's like 150,000 pulled from 208 for the Zeeb Road pathway. So there was just, all I want to say is, I think a way to do this is to say, to approve the budget amendments as presented, less any budget amendments already adopted by the board in fiscal year end 22.
Okay, so what happens if the way a budget amendment prior was done was more than what is being presented tonight? That doesn't make,
well, but you
doesn't make sense to me. What specifically were you just mentioning about a budget amendment that was done?
Oh, no. All right, so this is from January 25th. It was a motion by Jerome, support by Vogel, to award the contract for Zeeb Road Pathway Phase 4 construction to LJ Construction in the amount of $912,858 with a contingency budget of $50,000 for unforeseen circumstances to be paid from 208-753-978 funded by $750,000 MEDC grant pending 100,000 Fund 400 fund balance tab and $112,858 Fund 208 fund balance.
Okay, well, if you look at the Parks and Pathways budget, the amendment requested for Phase 4 of the pathway for the current fiscal year is $75,000 because that's about what's going to be spent. And then for next year, there's $1 million. See, the problem with passing a budget amendment like that associated with a request to spend funds, especially at that time of the year, is there is no way that money was going to be spent in the current fiscal year. So that budget amendment made not a lot of sense, because most of it was going to be spent in the next construction season, which was the next fiscal year. So that's where we put the money.
So this would be on page 25 of the hard copy, line under 978.
So you did consider the ones passed. This was January 25th. So I was just confirming.
Everything in these budgets that I am not personally aware of, which Parks and Pathways I know about, was created by people who know.
Okay.
So I cannot promise you that everything that needs to be here is here, because I'm not a mind reader. And I'm not somebody who can look into the future to see what bills are going to come in.
We did.
But every amount of care was taken to put the money where it needed to go in each fiscal year according to when it would be spent.
I was just going to say that there were multiple meetings. I mean, the work really kicked off in earnest in January 7th, I think, looking back, but, it even began before that. But that's when you started actively soliciting input from all of the different sort of experts on the different parts of the township budget. So it'd be, for the fire department, it would have been Andy, for assessors, it would have been Warsha. And for Parks and Pathways, we had a meeting, at least one meeting that I recall with folks who were directly involved in parks, with Pathways projects, and separate meetings with parks.
I exchanged emails multiple times with Andy Turner, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm terrible with names, so forgive me if I get them wrong. Multiple times with Jane Vogel, and many other people who knew this stuff better than I. I mean, I literally put down what they wanted, and then I would ask them questions. Well, does this include, when you say this, did you really mean that, or did you mean this? And they would answer the questions, and we came up with, this was the best answer.
And one of the questions that I recall you asking of many people was, what costs are going to hit between now and the end of March?
Correct.
So they should be part of this fiscal year's budget, and what costs are not and should be looked at for next year's.
I put everybody on that hot seat. Tell me, as best as you can predict, where things are going to end up on March 31st, and that's for goods and services through that day, not invoices received through that day. And then, how much will pick up come April 1 and go through next March 31st.
So if I remember correctly our conversation, you explained to me that this document encompasses the prior budget amendments that had been made over the course of the fiscal year to the existing current fiscal year budget, and those changes, the information that you were gathering from the various sources about spending that was going to occur that hadn't yet been reflected, so that all of that information is incorporated here.
To the best of my and everybody else's ability.
So this is a good example. I can tell you that you can relate it. So we've already done the 1.5 million budget amendment. It appears here. I want to have a motion that makes clear we're not doing 3 million.
I see.
Okay, so that's why I'm suggesting something like as presented. Something.
Is that the fire?
Yeah, but it illustrates the point, if you could describe it.
So on page 44, for those who are looking at the hard copy, on Fund 431, Fire Station Capital Project, 1,500,000, and the amendment requested is
See, we did that.
1,500,000. But does this relate back to the question about the capital?
No, I'm just
No.
talking about the model motion.
Oh.
What now? I don't
Trustee
understand the
Cortez.
question.
Well, so I have a question, clarification related to that. So am I understanding it correctly, Ms. Egler, that the 21-22 amendment requested amount listed in that second to the last column is not necessarily the amount of the amendment that is requested, but the total amount now in that budget line reflecting all the amendments? So that on that total revenue line on the capital improvement project, the 2021 approved was 1,500,000, and the amendment requested says 1,501,800, but that's really only an 1,800 increase over the budget. Am I
No.
interpreting that correctly?
Yes and no. The 1.5 million in the approved was for the transfer in, and that's the same number in the current request. So in effect, you're not actually amending that line item. The 1,800 is interest earnings.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong line.
Yeah, you were looking at the total.
But in general, the point still holds. So whatever amount appears as the 2021 amendment requested is not that's the amount of an amendment request, that's simply the total amount reflecting any and all amendments.
That's the final number, yes. It's not an addition to, it's replacing of.
Okay.
Because that's what I want the motion to reflect, Jackie.
Okay, so.
Can you do that?
Well, all you really need to say is that the 21-22 amendment request column becomes the final budget. It's not in addition to, it replaces anything prior to.
See, I thought that's what you meant, what the language meant by consolidated township budget amendments. But maybe I misunderstood that.
So wait, we can easily just add that little clause as reflected in the column labeled 21-22 amendment requested on the consolidated budget spreadsheet. Does that reflect it?
Almost, yeah.
How about as presented in the FYE 2023 budget column?
Budget document.
21,
It would
sorry,
be the it would be the fiscal year end 23 budget document.
document,
And if we could just say,
column 20, labeled 21-22 amendment requested?
Yes. That becomes the final budgeted numbers for the fiscal year.
yeah, I just want to say as the person who'll be entering this, I want it to be clear. I'd like it to say, which is inclusive of budget amendments already adopted by the board in FYE 22.
Okay, which is inclusive of,
Can you make sure that you reference the version of this document? Because we have multiple versions. This is March the 28th.
This is our budget.
Yeah.
The others were draft, kind of working.
which is
Well,
inclusive.
they've all been drafts. Yeah, but this is the final.
Yeah, so March 28th version. That's fair for the amendments.
In the March 28th version
Already.
of the FYE 22-23 budget.
So as presented in the March 28th, 2022.
Today's the 29th.
Oh, sorry.
Well, but what we're referring to is the date on the document.
Okay, but we got it at 9 AM this morning. It was disseminated to the board on the 29th.
The date stamp on the document, if you look up at the top, the first page is 3/28/2022.
I mean, I think for clarity, the label that the document
Okay.
has, rather than the time we're seeing it.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, we've had so many of these.
I know, that's, and that's when I realized that there was a date stamp, I realized, oh, that's helpful, because it helps you know which version you're looking at.
You're welcome.
So, as presented in the March 28th, 2022 FYE 2023 budget document column labeled 21-22 amendment requested, which is inclusive of budget amendments already, what did you say?
Adopted
Adopted.
by the board in fiscal year '22.
But see, I'm sorry, I'm gonna disagree with that, because let's go back to the case of the Z Road pathway. It's not. The budget amendment that you guys did said $1 million was put in the 21-22 budget. This says 75,000. That's why I'm saying that phrase is not necessarily an accurate phrase.
I think it's accurate to say inclusive. I don't think it would be accurate to say minus or less. Because look at the 1.5 in fire. I want to,
What that's showing is nothing's changed.
Which is inclusive of the relevant FYE 2021 share of all previous
well, it's,
amendments?
I think we just say which may include. Okay?
So,
May include this.
Okay, does that work?
which may include instead of which is inclusive?
Right.
Which may include. I just want to be clear, like with fire, we're not doing,
When you say may include,
Budget amendments.
that's very loose.
yes.
To me, it's far clearer, if you want to be completely clear with no ambiguity,
Yes.
that column replaces any budget that came before it.
So it's the final.
That is the final adopted budget for that year. It is not changes to, additions to, or subtractions from. It is the final budgeted number, period.
Technically, making our record accurate, she was saying.
So,
You could simply say that the column labeled the 22 amendment requested becomes the final adopted budget for the township for that fiscal year.
so then the motion would read, to approve the consolidated township budget amendments for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022, as presented in the March 28th, 2022 FYE 2023 budget document column labeled 21-22 amendment requested, which
Becomes the final adopted budget numbers.
For the township for fiscal year.
Year 21-22.
which becomes the final budget adopted for FYE 2022.
21, 22.
FYE
You
22.
can say fiscal year ended 22.
It's just FYE is the year it ends.
Oh, okay.
folks comfortable with that? Okay, I'm comfortable with that modification to the motion. Are you as the second?
That's fine.
All right. Well, in that case, unless there's further discussion, I believe we do have to have a roll call vote on these particular motions with regard to the budget.
I think we should, even if we're not required.
Even if
because
we're not
it's an
required, but I
important
think we
document.
actually are required.
Yes.
Please call the roll.
Flintoff, yes. Corto?
Yes.
Newell?
Yes.
McLaughlin?
Yes.
Hathaway?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. In that case,
Now, can I make a comment? I'm always making comments, sorry.
please go ahead, Treasurer Palmer.
I just said earlier, the budget is a plan. We're doing our best to plan for the year. This that we just did made it the official record. Still called a budget, but it made it the official record for 2021.
Thank you.
For what it's worth.
Well, and I think that is a good introduction to the next item, which is the consideration of the budget resolution. And a good reminder that the budget is a kind of evolving document. I mean, we are adopting this as, sort of a working record that will evolve over time. And as we just saw, it may come out a little bit different than it starts, but, this is our rough plan for spending for the coming year. And I would like to, start by making the motion to approve the resolution to adopt the Township of Scio General Appropriations Act, approving FY 22-23 budget for April 1, 2022 to March 31st, 2023.
Well, I have questions about the resolution before we get into it.
Well, why don't we have the motion and then we can work on it.
It's gonna get complicated.
Is there a second? Second, so moved by Hathaway, second by Corto. And now we can have discussion. Clerk Flintoff.
It's okay. So I'm looking at the resolution.
So this is the General Appropriations Act approving FY 22-23 budget. Everyone should have a copy.
Yes, also.
Yeah.
Several questions. Why did you cut the incorporation of the budgeted positions from what we've done in the past? We've always had the positions or the chart that we regularly update. The board authorizes positions, right, throughout the year.
So in draft.
In the past,
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were.
yeah, but in the past, we've incorporated the authorized position, and my understanding from David was that he wanted to keep things as status quo until he had a chance. And so to keep things as status quo, I would recommend putting that provision back. We had it in last year's, it was cut. All it says is, it's around 10 or 11, to adopt the employees, current authorized positions as reference. And I think by cutting that, and additionally, some of the footnotes in the budget document where it says assessing's asked for a position, utilities asked for a position, some things are mentioned in there, some things are not mentioned in there. It's very uneven. So I don't know what the significance, without something in this resolution that speaks to what our intention is on positions, it makes me very nervous, because then there's kind of uneven footnotes about where there is a position or not a position, assumed, not assumed. I'll also say, it's been our practice, long-standing policy, that the board approves and authorizes positions. However, I believe that is only through resolution. And in all the resolutions, your job description, other resolutions, we always say, the board desires to retain its authority to approve and authorize positions. So I want to at least have that language in here, something that states that this board will continue to authorize positions and that we're not to assume an authorization through a footnote in the budget, which is possible. So,
May I respond?
Yeah, what was
Okay.
your thinking?
Well, so I started jumping in to answer your question. I didn't realize you were still asking it. But let me try to address at least the first part. The reason that came out is there were conversations involving the township administrator, who is our sort of head of personnel. I'm not sure exactly how it's described, but
HR.
in HR. And the thinking was that the hiring questions, and there were multiple hiring questions, would be deferred until after we adopted this budget. So there's an intent to work on addressing these various questions, and they vary depending on the nature of the position to be hired. Some of the positions that are in play are positions that have already been authorized at some point. Some of them are not on the list, and there was I think a recognition at some point in February that there just wasn't the bandwidth to answer all of these questions in the time that we had to adopt the budget. So the direction that we got, and it was primarily the deputy treasurer and myself who were sort of taking that direction from the township administrator on this question, was to set all of that aside and with the intent to deal with it after today, after we adopt this budget. So it's not that we're somehow wiping the slate clean or anything like that. And I think that was clarified on Friday that the adopted the list of authorized positions remained.
Or that I'd like to state that it remains.
If I may.
Sure.
The intent of my answer was that the list remain as presented. I was not recommending any changes to it. There are some positions in there that are no longer valid. There are positions that may or may not have already been approved. What I was suggesting was that we leave the list intact as it is, and that I would offer at a future date recommendations to the board for corrections to the entire list en masse. So in other words, at some future date, we would come up with a proposal for the board's consideration that would add positions X, Y, and Z, whatever those may be, and eliminate positions A, B, and C from the list so they're no longer valid. That's what I was, maybe I didn't explain it adequately, but that was the intent of what I was trying to get across last Friday.
Well, so just to finish the answer, so presented with that position from that sort of direction from the township administrator, my understanding is that it's actually, a relatively recent addition to attach the list of authorized positions to the budget authorization or approval.
A recent improvement to bring us into the norm.
Well, I understand, but the way that you just said it made it sound like we've been doing it for a long time, and I think actually
2 years.
the first time that I, had encountered it was when we approved the budget in March
But every other
2021.
government does it.
Well, okay, but that's not actually the same thing.
It's more important.
Well, I realize that we're getting at different arguments. Trustee Noel.
Okay. I'd like to turn to our administrator and ask for some clarification. Are you recommending that this list of currently existing positions should be included as it was last year?
My question was the list, how was it adopted last year? If it was adopted as part of the budget, then there is an argument, I would think, that it expires with the budget and needs to be renewed. If it was adopted as a list of authorized positions, then I would offer the opinion that it continues on as it's currently presented unless rescinded or amended. I do not know how the motion was at that
I have the
particular time.
answer.
You have it?
And it's what I would propose we do here. It had total full-time equivalents, number of authorized positions as presented in the budget document at the public hearing is adopted by reference. It was an older version of this. This has been updated with all of the changes we've made throughout the year. Additional FTEs will require board approval. So what I would recommend, an amendment, I make a motion to amend the resolution to add a clause, total full-time equivalents, employees.
What number would it be?
Well, I think it should come right out from where you cut it. So right under total estimated appropriations. Or we could do it, how about this? It could be between 8 and 9. Between 8 and 9. A motion. Between 8 and 9 to add total full-time equivalent employees, the number of authorized positions as presented in the total full-time equivalent employees as of March 17th, 2022, which was the document you guys were all sharing.
I didn't think we ever approved that presentation, Jessica. I
Yes.
know we've talked about it a lot, but I didn't think we approved the whole.
We did as part of the budget, and then as we make changes, it's updated. So we approved it as part of last year's budget. It's just a current list, everybody's looked at it.
Can you read it again, Jessica?
Yeah, let me read it once, and that's it. Total full-time equivalent employees and total full-time equivalent employees, period. The number of authorized positions as presented in the document titled Total Full-Time Equivalent Employees as of March 17th, 2022 is adopted by reference. Additional FTEs will require board approval, period. That's my motion.
So, okay, discussion?
Sure.
Go ahead, you go.
I just wonder if we can get a copy of that.
So if we approve this motion as made and seconded, that we're approving that list of employees?
What's that?
Are we approving that list of employees?
Which is the status quo.
Yeah, it was attached to the,
It's a current list of employees.
right, so this was attached to the document
There's
that
nothing new.
that we held the hearing.
Okay, so this is exactly what we
Yeah, it's
saw.
just bigger.
Right,
Okay.
right. So it's easier to read. But this page was attached to the budget document that we had the public hearing on. The reason that it's not in here is because of the direction from the township administrator. No sort of ulterior motive or anything like
Well, and
that.
I would say it would also clarify that in the budget, when we're looking at the table, we see, like, the assessor has requested something, there's money here or there. We would then be clear that those are not being authorized yet, right?
Yes.
We don't have any
there-
confusion.
Well, the only thing that the budget does is put money.
Appropriations.
Yes, it appropriates the money.
I know.
Then we have to take the step of actually authorizing.
Right,
And
but-
that's when we would authorize the position and go forward with the hiring.
But it's just a conspicuous absence, because it's very typical to authorize positions.
Well,
No, I'm good, unless you got a question.
Well, I was just gonna say, so this is not, so putting this back in is not inconsistent with the direction, it's actually consistent with the direction?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
all right, well, then.
Yes, it was a misunderstanding to take it out.
Okay, it's fine with me. I thought
Okay,
I
good.
thought I was responding to the direction from the township administrator, I mean, these are all this document is all positions that this board has already reviewed and.
Is this a friendly amendment then?
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I would say is that there, as the township administrator said, there are some things that we've authorized in here that I think are sort of being rethought.
Yes.
Yeah, he has already stated that.
Yeah, so I just don't want anyone to think because we're adopting this as part of the budget, that all of these positions are going to happen. But that's fine, I think, let's do that.
I would just make one other comment. You will see the list again with changes to it. But my point is that when you see it, it will be in mass. So we're not doing this piecemeal. So I'm not going to come to you one day and say, I want the assessor's position, or I want the project manager position, or I want the utility position, or for the fire chief, I want firefighters. So what will happen is you will get a revised version of this list, and my recommendation to you at that point in time would be to adopt it as presented, because they've all been vetted. These positions are being requested. There's funding sources for it, there's job descriptions for it. Anything that is being stricken is something we no longer need. So it would be done in mass rather than pick and choose right now. Because right now, I can't give you a definitive list, because we need to verify which positions we're actually going to do right now, what the order is going to be as far as posting, and also what the finance source is, what the budget source is to fund these positions.
That answers my concern.
So sort of implicit with this friendly amendment is a renumbering of the items after.
Between 8 and 9?
Yeah, after 8, there'll be the insertion of a new item, or the reinsertion of an old item, I don't know how you want to characterize it, and a renumbering thereafter. Are there other comments?
I have more, but you can call on other people.
Well, I don't see anyone else with their hand raised.
Not yet.
I did my left hand to change it up.
Good job, Jessica.
Thank you, Donna. I have 2 changes to number 2 and 3. I'd like to make the administrator, not the chief administrative officer, responsible for budget preparation, presentation, and monitoring. And I believe the fiscal officer should remain the clerk, as it was last year, always has been, is typical in every township. Here are the reasons why. I will give the specific motion. I'd like to make a motion to change number 2 to the following. The administrator shall have final responsibility for budget preparation, presentation of the budget to the legislative body, and the control of expenditures under the Budget and General Appropriations Act. To 3, fiscal officer, period, the township/administrator, insert clerk, shall be, continue as is. That is my motion. I'm happy to explain it if there's a second.
I'll second.
The reason for this is it need not be the chief administrative officer who is responsible for preparation, presentation, and monitoring of the budget. The board may, by resolution, assign anybody to be responsible for those. I would recommend that our administrator be responsible for those. I think he's well-positioned. I think we have given him a lot of responsibility, and he needs to have the responsibility of the budget to actually monitor and carry out some of these things that we've said. Now, I don't think that diminishes any of the statutory duties of the chief administrative officer, who is our supervisor, in submitting the audit or requesting extensions. But in fact, MCL, where are we? I just want to make sure no one's confused. The authority for the board to appoint anybody is under MCL 141.434, Section 14, subsection 1. Unless provided by resolution, the chief administrative officer shall have final responsibility for blah, blah, blah. This would be the resolution to do that. I think that the administrator is the appropriate position to do that. I also think the clerk is the appropriate officer to continue to provide financial reports to this board as a matter of checks and balances. It would be inappropriate to ask a staff person, no matter how high level, to provide the reports from the journals and ledgers. MTA shows it's the norm for the clerk to provide the financial reports and the treasurer to provide the investment reports. That's the natural checks and balances of a township. It aligns with all of the duties of the clerk under MCL 41 and of the fiscal officer under MCL 141. And I maintain with the intersection of the general law, township, and the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act, that it is in fact the clerk who is the official by law charged with the responsibility for the financial affairs of the local unit to ensure that the local accounts are maintained and kept in accordance. I don't believe it's illegal for this board to appoint somebody other than the clerk. I would maintain, though, it would be extremely strange, highly unusual, and I think inappropriate. I think David will do a better job of preparing, presenting, monitoring the budget. I know he has a vision for how he wants to handle budget amendments, and I think we should give him a chance to do that. So those are my reasons for the motion.
Trustee Noel.
I'd like to hear a little bit from our administrator on this issue. Where do you stand, David, on this?
Well, it's quite interesting because I've had the same conversation with both the supervisor and the clerk, and they've each asked me to consider, or at least to look at, the alternative proposals. You just heard the one amendment, and quite frankly, I'm going to respectfully disagree with both of you. I'm going to ask this board to not approve the clerk's amendment, with all due respect.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask this board to remove me as fiscal officer under number 3, again, all due respect to the supervisor, and that you retain the supervisor as the chief administrative officer and you retain the fiscal officer as the clerk as the status quo. I'm the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee and certainly can move forward in that regard. And quite frankly, with the board, I believe you are straying away from the township administrator model. You did not want a manager. That's fine. I am not the township manager. If I was, I would be the chief administrative officer by definition of statute. Therefore, if I was the manager, I would be ineligible to be the finance officer.
Correct.
So therefore, if I'm the administrator, I hold the same opinion. And again, quite frankly, I think you're straying too far from the original intent. And quite frankly, if you insist on this, then I'm going to insist on a contract negotiation. Because you're putting too much, you're moving too far, and you're giving me no staff to do the job.
I withdraw my motion. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
I'd like to make another motion. I'd like to make a motion to change, to keep it as is, except on number 2, keep 2 as is, change fiscal officer to the township clerk shall be the fiscal officer.
I'll support.
That would be the status, what we did last year in the status quo.
That would be the status quo of last year. The reason for the change is, as I explained to David, was a recognition and acknowledgement of the very cogent argument that he's made for having reports of various types on finances on a regular basis. And because we have already, as a board, made it clear that all staff, including the finance staff, report up to the township administrator, that, to me, made sense as in terms of these duties that are enumerated here for the fiscal officer. What I learned, as I also shared with David earlier today, is that the Uniform Budget and Accounting Act is almost silent on this question of a fiscal officer. This is,
Right.
I'm sure I have another turn to speak, but the fiscal officer duties are really an invention of this document in Scio Township. There's nothing in the Uniform Budget and Accounting Act that delineates all of these responsibilities. To my thinking, and I think I would hope that the majority of the board would agree, we have not had the kind of financial reporting that is described in this document under the status quo. And that is why making a change made sense. We didn't have a township administrator when we adopted this back in March of 2021. We now have a township administrator. I think from what I've discovered looking at other municipalities is that fiscal officers, I don't know if this is true of townships, general law or otherwise, but in looking at other municipalities, the fiscal officer is often not an elected official. It is someone who is the director of management and budget, or the budget director, or some person of, sort of designated for that kind of responsibility who is on staff, not an elected official. And I think that makes sense, because if you're looking to somebody to be responsible for giving these kinds of reports, you want it to be someone who has that kind of knowledge and a hands-on responsibility. But you also want somebody who is answerable to the legislative body, and someone who is an elected member of the legislative body does not fall into that category. So I think
Can I
well, just as soon as I finish. So I think that's why it made sense to me to do it. What I would propose is if you're not in a, sort of
He's opposed.
positioned to accept this responsibility, that we just eliminate this from this document, because it doesn't really need to be here. We don't need to spell this out. It's not something that has to be designated. There's no big role for this fiscal officer in the Uniform Budget and Accounting Act. It's sort of an option. And I don't think we need to designate any particular person if we're not going to take the step of having a staff person who is assigned this responsibility. Trustee Noel.
Okay, a couple comments. You made a comment that Jessica has been unable to provide these reports. Well, Jessica hasn't had the staff in the finance department to assist her in preparing these reports.
We have done it monthly since the fall.
Pardon?
It's been monthly since the fall.
Okay. And it may not be required in the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act. I hear you on that. I know it is the clerk in many townships. I don't see anything wrong with it continuing to be the clerk in our township. And I would like to hear some of David's thoughts on that in terms of it being the clerk as the designated fiscal officer.
Well, it is the clerk in many jurisdictions,
Yes.
that's true.
Yes.
As the supervisor said, it is also a high-level finance person in other jurisdictions. Generally, I've spent most of my career in a city, the longest time period in a city. So that's a little bit different. And that person clearly was not an elected official, but again, cities are different. What I was suggesting when we had the conversation, I had the conversation with the supervisor, was that that I understood the point, but I would suggest that it would be the senior finance person who presently does not exist in this organization.
And I would support that.
And the idea that we discussed was a transition phase to that longer term goal. We kind of disagree on the interpretation of that, and that's not unusual. But this was a disagreement that was simply, I think, I don't disagree with the concept that it's a transition. I think that's a fair characterization of it. I would disagree with the concept that we need somebody else in those positions until we bring in whoever that person is. I do agree that we need additional entry-level or office professional type support staff for finance. We also need, in my view, a higher level person that can do some of these oversight functions, can help with the supervisor in preparation of the budget, can help with the clerk in the administration of all of the responsibilities of the clerk, and also can help the treasurer in all the responsibilities of the treasurer as well. And so that's why I'm basically suggesting that at this point in time, I do not believe I'm the correct person to do that. I don't believe that person is presently here in the building. We don't have that person on staff yet. And I would offer the opinion that the status quo can certainly solve that issue in the short term. Because if everything goes well, we'll be having a bigger discussion in the coming months about how we want to proceed as an organization. And again, the new, and we can also talk about this at Budget and Finance.
Well, I would defer this to Budget and Finance then. I would say, let's take this out because it's in transition and we aren't in agreement. The simplest way to deal with it is to take it out of this motion, take out the fiscal officer entirely, and then have a discussion in Budget and Finance about the best solution to that.
Oh, well, a point you raised earlier, thank you, everybody, for your comments. You talked about wanting somebody who does fiscal reports, who's responsible to the board. And I would disagree with you on that. One thing, I will continue to provide periodic financial reports to this board, whether you designate me as the fiscal officer or not, until we get stabilized, okay? We don't have the staff. We don't have the right combination of skills and configuration. I will continue to do it, and I think I should be the one to do it, and that's why I'm gonna do it anyways. So we can have fiscal reports and then the clerk's fiscal reports if you want, or you can just have the clerk's fiscal reports. Because I'm gonna do it anyways, and I'll tell you why it's important. It's important for checks and balances, particularly when you have, I think that the community should want somebody who's independent, who is not feeling under the thumb of this board, who is not, and not that, David, you are your own person, and I respect that. And I will say, I would not put any staff person in this position of doing these reports at this moment of this board. I think it should be somebody who is as independent as the supervisor is. If he's going to be involved, then I think you need somebody else who's equally independent involved. So it's, Will, it's the kind of thing where, MTA, every clerk does regular reports, financial reports. If we had what David is describing, more of a CFO who supported all the functions, you know, I can understand that. There's different ways to organize it. But that person I would want to be more protected and independent and not frankly sitting here right now saying, if you do this, I would like a contract renegotiation. So I think we need to hear our administrator who just said that right now, okay? He has said he doesn't want to do it. We all know it needs to be done. I am telling you, I'm going to continue to do it. So taking out the fiscal officer because it's not necessary, just like the CAO is not necessary. We could take out a lot of things that aren't necessary, but that would just be petty, right? So what I'm talking about is what's necessary. And regular, good, honest reporting is necessary. So we're gonna keep doing that.
Treasurer Palmer.
Addressing the thoughts that Jessica has just said. Her statutory duties are general ledger. Yes, she is responsible under that for the reports, etc., to the board. Now, key word is responsibility.
Right.
There is a point, and she's already stated, you know, with things that she has to do, there's only 24 hours in a day. She didn't say that, that's my say. But, so the responsibility is still there. We know we have to have staff. So, she's doing her responsibility. Yes, she will continue, because the law says she has to.
Yeah.
But we have to, I agree that let David do what he's been trying to do and working on, come with all of these recommended structural changes. Now, Jessica will still have to make sure those reports are done. She may not be doing them.
Right.
But the responsibility is still there. Right now, she's got to do them because there's no one else.
Right.
So I don't know as we need the term fiscal officer. I think we could just simply restate the township clerk.
Did you just say the clerk?
Shall be responsible for, quote the statute, general ledger and reports.
Doing the reports in
Or
section
whatever.
12, yeah, that's
Whatever.
fine.
We could put that in there. We're just reiterating her duties statutorily. Because it's there, no matter what we say. That's her duty. No matter what the title, she's the clerk, elected by the people to do the job.
Thank you, Donna.
The words get in the way, folks. We've got to try to just keep it simple. We know we've got work to do internally, structurally. We'll get there. We better get there. Okay. So we can quit having meetings that, well, it's not too late tonight.
I like the way that Anna stated that, and that echoes my opinions too. I think it should remain as Jessica. How we word this in here is open to discussion as far as I'm concerned. But she's going to be doing some of these duties anyway.
It's not like I've been power tripping over being the fiscal officer.
I mean, we should state it appropriately here,
Sure.
I believe. And I know when we eventually hire this upper level financial person that David is talking about, presenting to us, there will be flexibility on Jessica's part, right?
Of course. I would love to have help. Y'all would.
Well, if the clerk's duties include preparing reports, and as the clerk says, she will continue to do that regardless of whether we approve any particular language in this, then, and, you know, the township administrator prefers not to step into that position of being the fiscal officer, and there's no real reason to have a fiscal officer designated, then I think the simplest solution is to remove the language referenced in this document with regard to the fiscal officer. Let the clerk continue to carry out her duties as the clerk, preparing reports, delivering them to the board. And then we have simplified this task before us this evening. We don't have to have any particular language. So we would remove item 3, which designates a fiscal officer. We would remove
And section 12.
section 12.
No, not remove. I mean, are you saying, Will, this board does not want periodic reports?
I
We
think we want them.
So let's
But
say-
you're saying you're gonna provide them regardless.
Will, this is a policy matter. You could just say, the clerk shall transmit, and then leave that list, as Donna was saying.
And I think that's a better approach.
You don't want to cut out our intention to have budget monitoring documents. That would be
It
rash.
acknowledges her contribution. It's consistent with her statutory duties.
It's in line with all the MTA training about the reports that the treasurer provides and the reports that the clerk provides.
So in both of those, previously numbered 11 and 12, then numbered 12 and 13, but I guess it would be renumbered if we omit 3, back to 11 and 12, change
Yeah, and
fiscal
11 as
officer to
well.
clerk.
That's fine, yeah. Because 11, I do that anyways. We don't present claims for payment. I don't present claims for payment to you unless they're So you're gonna say the clerk. And then Will,
It seems to me that actually this is a place where the township administrator sort of belongs in item 11.
no. I'm sorry. Yes, of course, David would do that, but I have to do that. That's my job. I think the term fiscal officer the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act is written for all local units of government. Cities, counties, townships, whatever. So then you have to overlay it with the type of government you're in. So that generic term, fiscal officer, is me.
Well, making it the clerk instead of that is specific to our form. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
and
two ways to
Donna-
look at it.
Yeah, and Donna, I mean, this is what Donna and I do. That's why preparing accounts payable, making sure, we're ready to do payroll. That's what that number 11 is about.
Is it? I mean, in some ways, it seems like it's an appropriate role for the township administrator to play as procurement.
Talk to your legislator, because that's what's in the statute, Will.
Well, it's, like you said, this is not going to change the clerk's role, the clerk's statutory authority, right?
Will, our administrator has just said no, and I want to respect that. He set a limit, I
Well,
want to respect that.
Let's let the township administrator speak for himself on this question.
Well, if you're attempting to put me into being responsible for paragraph 12, then my answer is the same.
11.
Appropriation.
Appropriation, not a mandate to spend. Appropriations will be deemed maximum authorizations to incur expenditures. And here is where I think there's a role for you. The township administrator shall exercise supervision and control to ensure that expenditures are within appropriations and shall not issue any order for expenditures that exceed appropriations. As the procurement officer, I think that's an appropriate role for you.
That only works with a revision to our procurement policy and the last sentence,
How does it only work with a revision to our procurement policy?
because the procurement policy still has you as the chief procurement officer. David's job description has him as chief procurement officer, This is not even about procurement. I will say, all of us, our entire procurement policy together, make sure that expenditures are within appropriations. But that shall not issue any order for expenditures. That's me. That's the authorization. That's the check and balance of Donna and me. I mean, Will, this is getting to be academic. I mean, there's no discussion on this.
Comment. We have a good policy in place. I know what we're trying to do here, but department heads have to approve any amount to be spent or that has been spent before it even gets to accounts payable.
Yeah.
We've established a good process, which technically is what we're doing with the language in number 11. We just got that. I guess you have to put in that, here we go, the clerk's responsible general ledger, i.e., and we're putting in, or I don't think we should ask David to do this, but we're collectively working together.
Yeah, everybody's responsible.
So it's just, I guess you have to have someone, well, you know, if there's, somebody's got to settle an argument, let's put it that way.
Well, actually, if Mike, if you're available, I have a question for you. So the question before us is item 11 in the budget resolution. And in particular, my question is this in fact of statutory responsibility or authority of a township clerk to exercise supervision and control to ensure that expenditures are within appropriations and shall not issue any order for expenditures that exceed appropriations?
So this is sort of a combination of language, and I suspect that that's because I agree that generally speaking, the fiscal officer is the clerk in townships, general laws, particularly general law townships. So this language comes as modified out of 141.437, subparagraph 2, of which part of that says the chief administrative officer or fiscal officer shall present to the legislative body recommendations which, if adopted, would prevent expenditures from exceeding available revenues for that current fiscal year. So it's sort of a modification of that language that comes from the statute. But I will also say that when we're talking about the fiscal officer, the couple times that it is mentioned, which is only 3, I believe, throughout the act, 2 of those are in 141.437. One is in subparagraph 1, one is in subparagraph 2. And in each case, they refer to the chief administrative officer or fiscal officer. And so, for example, at the end of subparagraph 1, it states, and I quote, "The legislative body may require that the chief administrative officer or fiscal officer provide it with periodic reports on the financial condition of the local unit." Similarly, in subparagraph 2, it refers to the chief administrative officer or fiscal officer shall present to the legislative body recommendations, which, if adopted, would prevent expenditures from exceeding available revenues for that current fiscal year. So I think that's purposeful in as much as the legislative body can determine whether or not it is going to have a fiscal officer at all within the context of the Uniform Budgeting Act, or could assign those duties to the chief administrative officer, which in this case, because you have no manager, is the supervisor.
Well, that's kind of confusing. My question was, is this sentence here, does that align with the statutory authority of the clerk in a township? And it sounds like it could, but it's not sort of delineated per se as a clerk's statutory authority. It's something that would have to be granted by the township board. Am I understanding what you said correctly?
Well, pursuant to the Uniform Budget Act, then you could, like the way it's drafted right now, it is the fiscal officer, right? The fiscal officer shall exercise supervision and control. And that is somewhat similar to 437, subparagraph 2, that language, with, I think, the recognition that generally the fiscal officer is the clerk and issues those orders. So I think it's a combination of that language. So it's not troubling to me if the fiscal officer is the clerk and has those authorities or that authority under the resolution as drafted in both 11 and 12. That said, the fiscal officer could be somebody else as well to fulfill those roles under the Uniform Budgeting Act.
I agree.
Okay.
But as I said, in most general law townships, it is in fact the clerk that is the fiscal officer.
Right. Well,
So if we were carrying through and being consistent in terms of replacing fiscal officer with clerk, in number 11, we would replace fiscal officer with clerk as we are proposing to do in number 12.
Yeah, although I'm not sure why you would do that if you simply would take paragraph 3 and say the fiscal officer is the clerk and shall perform the duties of the fiscal officer enumerated in this act that serves the same purpose.
that's the motion on the table.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
All right.
Motion by Flintoff, support by Noel.
Well, that's, all right, fine. Let's just do that. So we're changing township administrator back to the
Clerk.
the clerk,
Yep, that was.
the township clerk, I guess.
Yep.
And then you don't have to make the other changes.
Correct.
Could you read it again?
So it would just simply change number 3, fiscal officer, the township clerk shall be the fiscal officer and shall perform the duties of the fiscal officer enumerated in this act.
And Will, if I could just point out, not another change, but just something to emphasize, because I know we've had differences of opinion over the last year, and I've been frustrated with this board about 14, budget monitoring. It is incumbent on all of us, any one of us, if you know that we're gonna spend money that's not appropriate, it's incumbent on any one of us to bring it to the attention of the board. Does that make sense?
I think we've done that.
Okay,
We've tried.
okay.
When the pot runs dry.
Yeah, I know, I'm just thinking about, it took months to get like the fire budget in place. We spent over $1 million without it budgeted.
Jessica, let's stay on this one issue.
Okay. It's just an example.
Okay,
Thank you, Kathy.
so the proposed amendment, I think, is wait, who seconded this? I can't remember, was it Cortez?
Motion by Flintoff, support by
No,
Noel.
but who made the original motion?
You did, support by Cortez.
So is that a friendly amendment? Trustee Corto can?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
then-
although it's a subject of a separate motion, so
Well, I'm just saying, could we accept the motion to change?
I'd like to just have the motion stand, this motion, I'd like to call it
All
on
right,
its
well, I
own.
just thought we could proceed to the vote if we could deal with that. All right, so the motion is to modify 3, fiscal officer to, from township administrator to township clerk.
Okay. Flintoff, yes. Corto?
yes.
Noel?
Yes.
McLaughlin?
Yes.
Hathaway?
No.
Palmer?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-1. Okay, now the main motion.
So the main motion is to move the resolution as now amended. Is there any further discussion? No? Please call the roll.
Great, and that was the only amendment, correct?
I believe that was the only amendment. Well, no, wait, there was another amendment.
No, there was the one
To modify, to add the FTEs.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
So there's two amendments, as amended, both of those amendments.
Thank you.
And that resulted in a renumbering.
That's great. Thank you.
So, as amended, two amendments.
Adopt, yes. Corto,
Yes.
Noel,
Yes.
McLaughlin,
Yes.
Hathaway,
Yes.
Palmer,
Yes.
resolution adopted.
Okay, well, that brings us to the last item on our agenda.
Now, can we get clean copies of all this work when we're done?
The resolutions, yes, I will do.
Please.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Corto, support by McLaughlin. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. We are adjourned at 10:30.
Thank you, everybody.
We're getting out early.